Hello, my lovelies. I am Stephanie, and I am a modern day mystic and a guide. And I work with the tarot in order to do my work with folks. And today I wanted to talk to you about utilizing decks and materials that are based out of a specific fandom in order to bridge between yourself and someone who may come from a different perspective than you do. I want to show you some of my cards with regard to decks that I have purchased, despite the fact that I don't understand a lot of the information in the fandom the way someone else might, and why I would do that. So I'd like to start with a concept deck called the Banned Books Tarot deck. This particular deck is listing each one of the books as a tarot representative, but also the book and author themselves. I would recommend the art is by Matthew Taylor Wilson, and uh, I don't know who wrote the Little White Book, but I would recommend that anyone who is a real book lover to look into the actual um, list of books that have been banned and how they've been represented on this in this particular deck. So here we see that the Knight of Pens, which would be the Knight of Swords, is represented by the book Percy Jackson and the Olympians. We have the Queen of Paper representing A Wrinkle in Time, and we have the Grapes of Wrath are represented on the wheel. So it would be extremely difficult for me to read the Wheel of Fortune tied to the Grapes of Wrath. However, I think that it's not about my personal ease when it comes to working with a deck like this. It is about the fact that I have somebody across the table from me that has um, a certain approach to life, and they see meaning where I don't, because I simply don't have it in me to know each and every one of the books that are on these cards. To Kill a Mockingbird as the Justice card makes sense, but um, the Giving Tree as the Queen of Inkwells, which is the Queen of Wands. Um, I know why the caged bird sings as strength. That makes sense to me because I understand those stories, but I haven't read the story Gender Queer, a memoir by Kobabe, and that's the Temperance card. So if I was working with someone who was extremely literate, who worked in librarian circles, who would get meaning out of the Great Gatsby, uh, represented as the devil, then I would ask them if they wanted to go into the deck with me. But I would be unable, well, there's the Great Gatsby. I would be unable to translate these storylines because I don't have the depth of reading and understanding of these banned books and traditional stories. I don't know all of the stories. And I would struggle to really find depth of meaning. And so I would need the other person, like a bridge, to be able to come deeply from the other side with a depth of knowledge and reading and understanding of these storylines and the zeitgeist of each one of these classics, as well as new banned books, and to have an understanding of how that meaning complements the traditional tarot labeling that's also on the card. And we would work together and meet toward the middle. You would see me doing the same thing with an anime tarot. I have said before on one of these recordings that I am many times drawn to anime or a fairy deck to lighten the energy of something. But I don't know many of the descriptions that come through like this particular deck. This deck is Natasha Iglesias, starts with a Y. And it in the back of the deck talks about um, the Empress is represented by Yamato Nadeshiko, the epitome of purity, poise, and kindness. The Hermit is represented or linked to the Hikikomori. And so, I mean, these are not characters that I know, but if I had someone across from me who was at the table who had a deep love for anime and a deep understanding for the characters and the way they're drawn on the deck, then they could come from one side of the bridge and I could come from the other side of the bridge. And this particular deck is not as thick in information as the banned book tarot deck, but it does have imagery that they might be able to inform me about. You know, there's many times where I'm reading for someone where I do all the heavy lifting. They don't speak much. They want me to just do the work without input. But there's other times where I need people to come from their side, their understanding, maybe their fandom, in order to meet me in the middle. Of course, if there is a standard Five of Swords card, I'm the one who's going to be explaining that. That's all on me. But if we have a character that's coming in with the Chariot, I don't know who this man is with the child on his shoulder, and perhaps someone from the fandom would recognize and understand who these characters are. And they would come from one side and I would come from the other because the Emperor looks fascinating, but it doesn't mean anything to me. The King of Pentacles, I mean, these are beautiful cards. The artwork is amazing. I love this redhead right here. But I'm only going to go so far if these are known characters in the manga world, or if they're caricatures of people that someone in that fandom recognizes deeper than I do. They're going to have to help me a little bit. We're going to have to work together on that read. But because we're bridging from two completely different worlds, we're learning from one another and we're able to draw a deeper meaning than I could do if I was just being held to the weights, the Rider Waite Smith, or if I was just being held to my own basis of knowledge. A couple other decks that I wanted to illustrate before I leave today is the Tarot of the, and I know I'm going to say this wrong, Tarot of the Sidhe, spelled Sidhe. That's a Gaelic name for the fairy race. I do not have a particularly strong understanding of the fairy race, but Emily Carding has done this tarot of the Sidhe, and this symbol is got an extra 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, as opposed to the 7 that you would see in some of the kanji that I see in Reiki. But these images are uh, uh, using different words, you know, closer to a an oracle deck. And so I would need assistance from the person that I was working with. Because Maker 9 and Dancer King, I can translate those. That Maker is probably the coins or the pentacles. Dancers are probably creation or the wands. Um, and so I've got a 9 of pentacles and a King of Wands. But the King of Wands is marked as the gift of wisdom, and the 9 of pentacles is marked as root and blossom. This is a stretch for me. And so if I want help, I think that we would be looking at the images together as a bridge between the client and I. There are also decks that have folklore, or again, we were talking about uh, the belief systems or fandoms that people are in that I can't both learn from the client and do my channeling work. And so in that situation, I think it would be really common to see that I would be working with, say, the Nightmare Before Christmas. Some people don't like the authors that have brought, pieces of work in that the work itself is representational of a cool art system or a cool um, uh, storyline, but then the person who brought it through is problematic. And so, these are not things that I or decks that I would have out or I would use because it might upset someone because of the belief systems of the author that did the work. But the Disney box, the Tim Burton Nightmare Before Christmas Tarot Deck and Guidebook, is such a strong fandom that when they see these images, it gives them joy. The Four of Needles makes a lot of sense to them when I'm explaining it. The star and the sun make sense to them because they love these storylines. They loved them as children, even if they now know as an adult that the author might be problematic. So I don't have a problem with working with problematic decks that, people have opinions about the Harry Potter world and fandom because of the author J.K. Rowling. But that doesn't mean that it isn't part of our societal understanding when we talk about a room of requirement. Those books brought in concepts into our zeitgeist, into our understanding that we didn't have before, new archetypes and new understandings and new vocabulary that we didn't have before. And so, despite how we all think about it, I may not turn down use of a deck just because the person who created it or the storylines behind it are problematic. But I am going to nod to the fact that we recognize that something's problematic. I also want to talk about the Folklore Tarot by Rowan Ortins. Is quite possibly one of the most beautiful deck backings I've ever seen. It's absolutely glorious. And the artwork is so lush, so incredibly lush. But it is particularly difficult to read in the situation of my not knowing some of the folklore. And so in this particular situation, I have not used this deck, despite the fact that I would have quite possibly 50 of the 78 cards made into artwork to put on my wall. I just think it is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. But it doesn't speak to me. I can't work with these images. However, if I was working with someone who could recognize this queen, whatever this character is, how that folklore, which myth or legend or culture or archetype this comes from, if I was working with someone who could recognize these things, it would bring so much to the reading. However, I simply do not know these characters well enough to do it justice. I know a King of Pentacles, I know a Queen of Pentacles, but I do not understand the basis of the folklore behind these two characters in the least. And so I simply, if I was by myself, could not get across the river to get a message landed with ease. Because, there's a hangman and he's a Viking god, obviously, of some kind, but oh, there's just so many things that I don't know, and I would need the person across from me to bridge across to create meaning, and that would be working closely together with someone who the uh, really knows the fandom or the mythology or the folklore or the place that short of I could read through the little white deck, but I can't memorize that stuff that fast. I'd have to be pretty motivated to learn something new, and perhaps I should be. You can definitely judge me for that. The last deck that I just wanted to show because I love these decks for the art, and we're so lucky to have these things created. This is a Unleash Your Hidden Power deck, anime tarot deck, that once again, beautiful artwork. The anime artwork is so classical, but I have not been able to understand how the artwork is translated from the traditional anime. I think it's possible in this particular deck, and I do have to read the guidebook more to find out if these are known characters, because I could read this High Priestess quite easily. I can read these lovers well. I can read the Six of Cups. These are traditional imagery. But I'm a little bit concerned that I don't know these characters, that if I was an anime expert or knowledgeable about the fandom, that I would recognize these characters. It feels like they should be someone I know. It feels like I should recognize this gal with her ponytails and that she would be a known person to me. And I haven't done enough research, and I simply cannot, like this character. How is it that this is not a known character? It probably is. I just don't know, and I can't be trusted to work with these cards until I can do my job right. But if I was working with a professional or someone who is deeply in the fandom, who understand these characters, I could do my part because clearly these cards are very clear from the tarot, Waite Smith perspective. But I would need someone to say, oh, and the character on the Fool card is an actual known character, and this is the storyline. So unless and until I research it, I don't use these decks on my own. But if I'm partnered well, I have these decks and I can use them with someone who can meet me halfway. And between the two of us, we create a bridge of communication, and it just, between the two, it becomes greater than its whole. So uh, thank you for letting me explain why I have some of these gorgeous pieces of art that I simply cannot use unless I am working together with someone who is better versed than I am in some of these fandoms and with some of this knowledge base. That's all I have to share today. I hope you have an amazing day, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.